Kamala Harris, District Attorney of San Francisco, Attorney General of California, Senator from California, Vice President of the United States, and now Democratic nominee for President of the United States. She has had a good career, but there are many senators. There are very few presidential nominees. So how did Kamala Harris get to this position? In 2020, Joe Biden was running for president for the third time. There was this thing called a primary where candidates for presidential nominees are voted on. But he was not leading in the polls. He was a distantly polling minor candidate for the first few state primary elections. The top candidate was Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders inspired the progressive voters of the Democratic Party, and he had a record of integrity which few politicians could hope to match. But then, Joe Biden won in South Carolina, and later state primary votes saw him taking an increasingly large chunk of the vote as the inevitability of his status as standard-bearer set in. No one really liked Joe Biden. He was settled on because he was a centrist establishment candidate, and he had been vice president. He was also an old white man who had had a long career in the Senate. He was to be the adult in the room in the race against Donald Trump. That is to say, he was not considered a more desirable candidate because of his policies, but that he was considered more electable than a progressive choice like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. Kamala Harris was also running for president in 2020 as a minor fringe candidate. Her campaign went nowhere, but her platform was noticeably more progressive than Joe Biden's. So Biden became the Democratic nominee for president in 2020, but he had to pick someone for vice president. He wanted someone to represent the progressive side of the Democratic Party, and he wanted someone younger. But he also wanted to virtue signal with his choice. Biden decided that the main qualification he had for vice president was being a black woman. Now, it's time for a more cynical look at this. Presidential nominees pick vice presidents. You don't vote on them. They are packaged with the presidential nominee, based on who they can pander to with that choice. In the case of Kamala Harris, her main, quote, qualification, unquote, was that she's black, and so Biden hoped to encourage the blacks to vote for him, not Kamala Harris, since she was his running mate. He hoped to get more women voting for him for the policy platform of, quote, putting a woman in the White House, unquote. And Kamala Harris is also mixed race. She is also Indian. So Biden could potentially get more votes from the Indian ethnicity if they were inspired by that. And perhaps it's a bit of a stretch, but Indians are Asian, so maybe even some Asian votes. But South Asians and East Asians are not the same race. So Kamala Harris was Biden's black token. Of course, he employs other blacks, but they are not representing his candidacy as Kamala Harris did, and they are not elected either. Biden, in fact, knows this story well. In 2008, Biden was running for president for the second time, and his campaign was a complete failure. Biden withdrew from the race before the first primary was held. The leading candidates were Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. Obama won the primary, and he was faced with the same decision that all presidential nominees face. Who would be their vice president? Obama was a bit of an adventurous choice, being a junior senator with only a few years' experience in the Senate, and being black. But as Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid put it, Obama was light-skinned and had no Negro dialect unless he wanted to have one. Obama searched for a centrist establishment figure, someone old, and above all, someone white, someone who could tone down the, quote, change, unquote, so that it wasn't a black ticket. Someone reassuring so that if the Negro president was too busy playing basketball to work, there would be an adult in the room making sure everything went as it should. That someone was Joe Biden. Biden was Obama's white token. Voters were drawn to Obama, not because of his policies, but because he was charismatic, and he suggested that a different kind of person with his non-elite background would mean a different kind of president, a president who practiced a different kind of politics. Change. The ultimate platitude. Anyway, Biden was elected president in 2020, and Harris presided over an unremarkable vice presidency. It turns out, as Obama should have shown, that being a different color, or even a woman, doesn't make you a different kind of leader. But for the kind of people who vote based on race and sex, job performance isn't the point. In 2024, Biden announced he was running for president, for the 4th time. Gone was his campaign talk of being a, quote, transitional leader, unquote, replaced by a well-fed ego telling him that he was the only candidate capable of winning. He finally beat Medicare, after all. He is the incumbent president, which provides a large advantage. The party duly endorsed the president's candidacy, Biden, quote, winning, unquote, the primary election. It is easy to win when you are the only choice. But Democrats were no more excited about Joe Biden in 2024 than they were in 2020. After his poor debate performance against Donald Trump, he lost the confidence of party leadership, and polls showed him consistently losing against Trump. After a few weeks of wrestling with his mighty ego, Biden announced he was withdrawing from the election, which left the obvious issue of who the candidate would be if the, quote, winner, unquote, of the primary had withdrawn from the election. Why hold an election at all? Kamala Harris was Joe Biden's choice of successor, and if it was hard to stand up to the president, it was harder to stand up to him after he agreed to withdraw from re-election. So there was no primary, and I have to emphasize that no one has voted for Kamala Harris. Her first presidential campaign was a failure. Biden chose her over popular progressive candidates because she is black and a woman. People voted for Joe Biden, not because they like Joe Biden, and certainly not Kamala Harris, a failed fringe candidate, but to vote against Donald Trump. The Democratic Party decided looking orderly was more important than having a real election, and confirmed Kamala Harris as the 2024 presidential nominee without any voter input. It is no doubt that voters prefer her to Joe Biden, and she may be a qualified candidate, but that isn't the same as winning an election by appealing to voters. The Democratic Party has, unfortunately, a checkered record when it comes to primary elections. Just look at the 1968 convention, which I won't get into, but the party apparatus selected a candidate who didn't participate in the primary elections and who Democratic voters did not support. And then they lost that election to the Republican nominee. Now the party has selected a candidate that never received any votes, and they are sincerely hoping that Joe Biden's black woman enthusiasm, or maybe it's just non-senile candidate enthusiasm, will be enough to overcome Donald Trump's popular character. As always, the great majority of voters will automatically support whomever their party puts on their ballots. Kamala Harris's platform remains an open question. The rules have been broken. Now it is up to Harris to turn her, quote, historic candidacy, unquote, into something worth voting for.